Truth is everywhere, but it only responds to those who are ready to see it. This is how the ancient initiates taught in the temples of Egypt, where being born spiritually was not a symbolic rite, it was a real death of the old self. Hermes did not speak to the world, he spoke to the awakened consciousness. Today, thousands of people have read the Kybalion. They quote it, share it, understand it, but they remain trapped in the same patterns of fear, lack, frustration, or disconnection. Why? Because knowing the laws is not the same as activating them. Because the Kybalion was not written as a user manual, but as a symbolic map. The true teaching is in what it does not say. Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, codified his principles in 7 fundamental laws, and each one of them describes how the universe operates. But there is a subtle error that almost all modern initiates make. They believe the universe responds to their knowledge when in reality it responds to their frequency. That is why this audiobook is not a philosophical interpretation of the Kybalion, it is an energetic decoding. Here we will not add an 8th law because that would be unnecessary and superficial. We are going to show you the missing piece so that each of the 7 laws actually works in your life, because what is missing is not theory, what is missing is activation. What Hermes did not write was not due to forgetfulness, it was due to wisdom. Certain keys cannot be transmitted, they can only be awakened, and that only happens when your consciousness is ready to see it from another place. As Neville Goddard said, nothing comes to you, everything emerges from you. Each chapter of this book will show you 3 things. First, the traditional law you already know. Then, the blind spot that makes it not work for you, and finally the hidden key, that internal condition that activates its power. If you are here, it is not to understand more, it is to embody, and that is the only real difference between a reader and an alchemist. Prepare yourself because what follows is not information, it is fire. And like all fire, it transforms or burns. Chapter 1. The Law of Mentalism. The all is mind. When Hermes affirmed that all is mind, he was not saying that the world is created by thinking beautiful ideas. He was pointing to something much deeper. Reality is born from an internal state prior to thought. The universe does not respond to what you repeat, it responds to the mental field from which you exist. That is why so many people think about abundance, health, or love and still live lack, conflict, or exhaustion. The law does not fail, the understanding fails. Most believe that the conscious mind creates when in reality it only interprets. Positive thinking does not change anything because thought is a consequence, not the cause. The conscious mind is reactive, noisy, fragmented. Hermes spoke of mind in a broader sense, a silent, coherent, and present field from which reality is organized. It is not the mind that wants, it is the mind that sustains. It is not desire, it is state. Here is the blind spot that almost no one explains. While the mind is anxious trying to force results, doubting or negotiating with the future, it is not creating, it is interfering. Creation occurs when the mind stops pushing and enters coherence. That is why the most transformative moments of life do not arrive when you chase them. They arrive when you are totally present. Hermes knew this, which is why he taught in silence, symbols and states, not in lists of affirmations. The hidden key to this law is simple, but demanding. Do not create from thought, create from mental state. A state is a combination of attention, emotion, and presence. When you are internally calm, focused, and aligned, your mind stops fragmenting energy and begins to order it. There, mentalism is activated, not because you did something, but because you stopped getting in the way. Imagine 2 people who desire prosperity. The first repeats affirmations every day, but does so from worry about paying bills, from fear of not achieving it, from constant comparison. The second affirms nothing, but lives in an internal state of sufficiency, focus, and clarity. She trusts her capacity, acts without anxiety, and maintains calm even in uncertainty. Over time, the second person sees opportunities, connections, and results that the first does not understand. It is not luck. It is mentalism activated from the correct state. How do you enter that state without exaggerated rituals? First, stopping the reactive mind, a few daily minutes of conscious silence without asking, without visualizing, without repeating anything, just being present. Second, bringing full attention to the body and breath until thought quiets down. And third, sustaining coherence between what you feel, what you think, and what you do. When that occurs, the mind stops being noise and becomes cause. Hermes did not speak of thoughts, because thoughts come and go. He spoke of mind, because the true mind is the field that remains. And when that field is ordered, reality obeys without resistance. In the next chapter, you will discover why it is not enough to order the mind if your identity remains the same, and how the reflection of the world responds to who you believe you are, not to what you desire. Chapter 2. The Law of Correspondence. As above, so below. It is probably the most quoted phrase from the Kybalion, and at the same time one of the least understood. Many repeat it as a mantra without realizing that it is not enough to understand the metaphor. You have to embody the law. This teaching is not just about seeing reflections. It is about understanding what generates them and how to transform them from their internal origin. Most believe that this law simply refers to the external world copying the internal. But Hermes was not speaking of superficial thought. He was speaking of structural correspondence between planes, levels, and states. That means that what you see outside is not a copy of what you think, but an exact echo of what you sustain as reality in your deepest internal plane. And this is where the blind spot appears, because many people try to modify their environment without touching the energetic identity from which they operate. They desire wealth, but identify with scarcity. They seek love, but see themselves as unworthy. The universe does not respond to what you beg for. It responds to what you reflect from what you are. In Hermeticism, correspondence is activated when there is alignment between planes, not when there is contradiction. You cannot ask for abundance with words and sustain fear with your emotion, because then there is no real correspondence. There is dissonance. Imagine a woman who constantly repeats affirmations like, "I deserve prosperity," but in her daily life accepts poorly paid jobs and relationships where she is not valued. It is not hypocrisy, it is correspondence. Because at a deep level, her self-image continues to be that of someone who is not worth it, and the universe simply responds with scenes that validate that identity. That is why Hermes said these laws were not dogmas, but keys. Each one opens a state of consciousness, and this one in particular asks you to look at your reflection as a precise clue of who you believe you are. It is not about controlling the image, but about transforming the origin. How is this law implemented? Start by observing your environment as if it were an honest mirror. Do not judge it. Read it. Ask yourself what beliefs are behind what I am living now. Then bring your attention to your energetic identity, not to your desire, but to your most automatic self-image. Do you see yourself as lacking, unworthy, invisible, or limited? That identity is the deep cause, not your isolated thoughts. To transform it, use 3 tools. Reconfiguration of internal language, not what you say, but how you speak to yourself when you fail. Embodied visualization, imagining from the new identity, not toward it. And action proof, acting as someone who already sees themselves differently would act. Only then can the external mirror begin to change. In the next chapter, we will explore the law of vibration and understand why it is not about vibrating high all the time, but about achieving internal coherence so that your frequency stops sabotaging your reflection. Chapter 3. The Law of Vibration. Everything vibrates, everything moves, nothing remains motionless. That is the central affirmation of the third Hermetic law. The universe, from the densest matter to the subtlest thought, is vibration in motion. However, this knowledge has been misinterpreted by many modern currents that reduce it to phrases like vibrate high or raise your energy, as if being happy all the time were the key. Hermes was not speaking of artificial happiness, he was speaking of sustained vibratory frequency. The law does not say that everything vibrates strongly. It says that everything vibrates, and there is an enormous difference between intensity and coherence. An intense emotion like euphoria can vibrate high, but if it is intermittent, impulsive, or disconnected from consciousness, It does not create solid reality. In contrast, a coherent frequency, even if soft, generates stability and therefore tangible results. Here is the common error, confusing emotional state with vibratory field. You can feel happy momentarily, but if your field remains charged with anxiety, need, or chronic frustration, your real vibration is incoherent, and in that field, no intention prospers. The Kybalion does not ask you to force your emotion, it invites you to stabilize your vibration. This requires awareness, presence, and practice because the universe responds to your habitual frequency, not to your occasional desire. And the only way to sustain an elevated frequency is not to want to feel more, it is to clean what distorts. Think of someone who has worked hard to improve their economy. They make an effort, study, fill themselves with affirmations, but every time they receive money, they lose it quickly or unexpected expenses arrive. Why? Because their vibratory field is destabilized by old beliefs, repressed emotions, or an internal pattern of self-sabotage. What vibrates is not what they say. It is what they sustain in their field without realizing it. Hermes taught that all creation starts from energetic movement, but that movement must have direction and is only achieved when mind, emotion, and energy work in unity. That is why the secret is not to vibrate high, but to vibrate clearly. If you want to live this law from consciousness, you need to observe your energy as a field, not as a passing emotion. Make pauses in your day to feel if your body is relaxed or tense, if your emotion is flowing or compressed, if your mind is present or trapped in projections. Then use simple but deep tools to stabilize. Conscious breathing to reset the nervous system, emotional writing to release tension, and brief rituals like cold showers or conscious walks to return to center. And above all, be honest with yourself. Are you seeking to vibrate higher, or are you ready to vibrate more stably? Because coherence is not forced, it is trained. In the following chapter, we will enter the law of polarity, and you will discover that you do not need to eliminate your shadow to evolve, but to integrate it as a sacred part of your creative power. Chapter 4. The Law of Polarity. Everything has two poles. Everything manifested in reality presents itself in opposite extremes, heat and cold, wealth and poverty, light and darkness, but in essence they are the same in different degrees. That is the basic teaching of this law. However, the error of the majority is not in knowing this duality, but in fighting with it. Hermes did not teach to fight against darkness, but to understand its function, because every time you reject a pole, you strengthen it. Poverty does not disappear when you hate it. Fear does not dissolve when you deny it. Anger does not heal when you repress it. Everything you resist persists, and not as punishment, but because your attention magnifies it. And here is the heart of the law. You cannot eliminate a pole by destroying it. You can only transform it by raising its vibration within you. That is what Hermes taught with the art of transmutation. Moving your consciousness from one extreme to the other, without struggle, without guilt, without fear. Imagine you want abundance, but every time you see wealth in another, you feel envy. What is happening? You are polarized in lack, but trying to force a vibration of prosperity. That creates internal short circuit, vibrational incoherence. The correct thing is not to deny envy, it is to see it as a clue, because behind it, there is an immense energy waiting to be redirected. The same happens with fear. An initiate does not repress their fear. They observe it, honor it, listen to it, and then raise its frequency by converting it into clarity. That is how poles are transmuted, integrating what was once judged as bad and using it as fuel. That is real alchemy. From Hermetic practice, begin by noticing what polarities you reject. Does criticism make you uncomfortable? Do you feel you must hide your need? Does it bother you to see others in success? Then, instead of reacting, breathe and observe. The first step is not to resist. The second is to ask yourself, what part of me needs to be integrated to move to another pole? Use reflective writing to explore your answers and then do conscious practices to neutralize. Techniques like gaze without judgment, meditation in silence, or somatic integration, exercises where you do not flee from emotion, but transform it from within. That is how polarity is lived, not as a war between extremes, but as a journey of internal transformation. In the next chapter, you will decipher how. The law of rhythm does not seek for you to control cycles, but to read them and take advantage of them like a wise person who navigates the tide, not like a novice who drowns in it. Chapter 5. The Law of Rhythm. Everything flows and ebbs, everything rises and falls, not because you fail, but because that is how energy moves. Hermes taught that the universe oscillates like a pendulum, and the error of initiates is to fight with that movement. Each extreme contains the other, and each movement has its counter-movement. That is why everything that ascends without anchoring falls. Everything that contracts with wisdom prepares to expand. Most desire constant abundance, constant motivation, constant results, but that goes against universal rhythm. Demanding absolute stability in a rhythmic universe is like asking the sea to stop having waves. The initiate does not ask for eternal calm. They learn to navigate the tide. When you force action in a moment of pause, what you get is exhaustion, not progress. And when you do not take advantage of a peak of energy, you lose the impulse that the universe was already giving you. The wise person does not avoid cycles, they anticipate them, and by anticipating them, move with them. In days of expansion they create, in days of withdrawal they observe, in silence they recover, in inspiration they act. That is the Hermetic dance, synchrony with the invisible pulse, like a musician who not only plays the notes, but respects the silences between them. Power is not in always doing, but in knowing when not to do. A person who goes through an emotional low and still forces themselves to produce, perform, or sell not only exhausts their energy, they also contaminate their vibration. Their actions, although visible, lack deep roots. But whoever respects their internal rhythm and uses that time to tune themselves, reflect or release the old, strengthens themselves for the next ascent. Their pause is not loss, it is investment. To activate this law in your life, begin by reading your internal cycles as if they were seasons. There are moments of spring where everything germinates with little effort, and moments of winter where movement is internal, silent, apparently sterile. Honor both. Use an energetic journal, lunar cycle tracking, or simply your presence to identify when to advance and when to withdraw. Ask yourself every morning, is today a day to sow or to rest the earth? That question can change the course of your energy. The journey continues with the fact that not everything you do has impact, because in the law of cause and effect, the visible is only the shell. What transforms is not what you do, it is what you emit while you do it. And there begins the true Hermetic power. Chapter 6. The Law of Cause and Effect. Nothing happens by chance, but not everything happens because of the visible. In the subtle planes of the Kybalion, the cause is not simply an act, it is a sustained frequency. Actions are only the echo of an intention that was already vibrating long before the first step. The material world is not a linear system, it is a resonant field where the invisible precedes the tangible and the energetic structures the physical. Many make effort, move, do, publish, run, but do not cause. And some, from silence, clarity, or alignment without apparent effort, generate real impact. What differentiates one from the other? The depth of the internal cause. Hermes was not speaking of mechanical causality, he was speaking of energetic causality. Because in the Hermetic plane, what causes is not the action, it is the coherence from which that action is emitted. The true cause is not measured by quantity of activity, but by quality of presence. A clear intention, sustained without anxiety in a state of coherence, has more power than 1,000 dispersed attempts. It is like a seed placed in fertile soil. It does not need noise to germinate. The deeper the intention, the more inevitable the result. This is how the true initiate acts, without haste, without doubt, and with a vibration that is already cause even before the body moves. The key is in understanding that the universe responds to the vibration behind the action, not to the action itself. A person who acts from fear emits confusion, even though they make effort to control results. In contrast, whoever emits certainty, even taking small steps, creates timelines of stability, because in the mental universe the result is not determined by form, it is determined by origin. Hermetic training involves learning to stop before acting and listen to the real cause that being is emitting. By observing what intention moves you, what emotion sustains your day, what underlying expectation directs your gaze, you can correct the vibration before launching the effect. From there, each movement becomes magical because it was already born complete. And if you want to begin using this law in a practical way, start by asking yourself 3 questions each. Morning. From what energy do I want to move my day? What intention do I sustain even if I do nothing? Is my presence sufficient to cause without forcing? Then remain firm in that intention for hours, not for minutes. At first it will seem that nothing changes, but one day you will see that everything changed, not because you did more, but because you caused better. And now that you understand the power of invisible causes, in the next chapter you will learn to use one of the most misinterpreted forces, the energy of creating. The law of generation is not activated with desire, it is activated with union. The masculine and feminine principle is not sexual, it is alchemical. Chapter 7. The law of generation. To generate is not to force, it is to unite. Hermes made clear that all creation starts from 2 principles, one that directs and another that receives, one that penetrates form and another that sustains it. This law, often reduced to physical sexuality or simple gender polarity, has been profoundly misinterpreted. In reality, true generation is an internal act, an energetic fusion between lucid intention and trusting openness. Intention is the seed, the direction, the masculine energy that gives form, while receptivity is the matrix, the feminine energy that allows, nurtures, and gives life. If there is only intention, there is tension. If there is only receptivity, there is waiting. Power is born when both meet in balance. That is alchemy, that is generation. The modern mind lives fractured between excess action and the lethargy of passivity. There are those who fill themselves with ideas, projects, and plans, but create nothing because their internal space is blocked by anxiety, control, or fear of failure. Others take refuge in contemplation, meditation, or allowing, but without clear direction. Their energy dissolves without creating anything tangible. The principle of generation is activated only when these 2 forces, doing and allowing, recognize each other, honor each other, and align. A person generates when their direction and their surrender coexist, when they act without forcing and allow without surrendering. This law is the basis of any true manifestation, the business that is born with soul, the relationship that flourishes without dependence, the idea that materializes without exhaustion. It is not about pushing life, but about fertilizing it from within. Translate this law into actions. Observe if your action is fighting with life or flowing with it. Review if you are wanting to control the result or if you trust your seed. Practice spaces of clarity. Write your intention with precision, then breathe, release, and allow the unforeseen to surprise you. There occurs magical generation. And in the closing of this journey, you will discover that the key only appears when you stop looking for more laws and begin to live the ones you already know. Now that you know the creative principle that Hermes codified in this law, the path opens toward the deepest closing of this book. What comes is not one more law, it is the unwritten key, the one that does not appear in the texts because it is only revealed to the initiate who is ready. There is something Hermes never wrote, not because he did not want to reveal it, but because he knew it could not be transmitted with words. The Kybalion is a map. Its laws are keys, but each reader must find their own lock. That is why, although many read, few activate. The unwritten key is the consciousness from which you apply the knowledge. It is not what you know, it is from where you use it. You can study the 7 laws your entire life and remain trapped in illusion. Or you can embody them in silence and see how your reality transforms. That is the difference between the initiate who repeats and the initiate who vibrates. Hermes taught in levels. The text was only the first step. True alchemy occurred in the invisible space where the students stopped looking for answers outside and began to embody the all in their interior. That alchemy is not taught, it is awakened. This audiobook was not made to add more information. It was created to return to you the power to see what has always been there, waiting to be used. Do not look for one more law. Do not look for a new promise. Return to the beginning. Reread each chapter from your new frequency, and above all, live the law. If these words resonated with you, take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you become part of a community of seekers who are ready to activate these ancient teachings in their lives. You'll receive notifications when new audiobooks are released, each one offering complementary paths of awakening and transformation. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content designed to help you embody these principles, not just understand them. The journey of the true initiate continues, and your next step awaits. Subscribe now and let's walk this path together, because while each audiobook contains a piece of the puzzle, only you can reunite them all. The true Kybalion is not read, it becomes you.